I recently acquired an old jack plane from a local church doing some house cleaning, and even though I have a lot of the necessary planes, for some reason I don't have a jack plane, one of the most necessary planes of them all. The tool was free, but in need of a lot of love and sandpaper. Hi, I'm Paul. This is openwoodshop.com, and today I'm going to show you how I restored this old jack plane. The jack plane was at one time the jack of all trades plane used by all kinds of tradesmen. I don't know what company made this one. The only markings I can see are R5 cast onto the sole, but I'm hopeful that more clues will come to light as cleaning progresses. Before disassembling, I started removing rust from the outside. The bottom surface or the sole of the plane must be true flat, free of wear and distortions. I left the blade, chipper, and other parts in place as I cleaned the base. Those parts put a small amount of pressure on the sole, and I wanted to keep that pressure in place so that the flatness of the sole would be maintained as I cleaned it. This may not have made much of a difference though, since the base on this very old plane was a thicker, heavier metal than on most new planes. I'm using a wire brush on the drill to take off the first layer of rust. When I change and run the sole over sandpaper laid on a flat surface, it shows that the sole is actually pretty flat. On a heavily used plane, I would expect a bit of dishing out in the middle area of the plane's sole. This tells me that although this tool has been around for a long time and it hasn't been very well taken care of, it also wasn't heavily used, and this will save me a lot of work. It's not really important, but I started at 150 grit and got progressively finer, eventually stopping at 600 grit. If you're wondering about the large sheet of sandpaper I'm using, it's a 12-inch by 18-inch paper for a square buff electric floor sander. I find it in the tool rental area of the Home Depot. It has a much heavier backing than regular sandpaper, and so it lasts a lot longer. After a lot of sanding, the sole and cheeks of the plane are looking encouraging. And now it's time to disassemble the parts and the whatever this toxic stuff is that's falling out. Luckily, none of the bolts were rusted in, and the two wooden handles are not broken, as they often are, and there are no missing pieces. Some of the pieces are a little stiff, but if I was as old as this plane, I'm sure I would be too. And in the case of the plane, though, it just takes a little bit of oil to fix all that. All of the pieces now get subjected to my arsenal of sandpaper, wire wheel or wire brush, and or polished on the buffing wheel. During the sanding, stamped into the blade, the words Marshall Wells Northern King came out. So another clue as to this plane's origins. Although Marshall Wells was most likely the retailer here, while the actual maker could have been several different companies. Anyway, all this sanding is not the most entertaining thing to do, and certainly not to watch, so for the viewer's sake, I'll just skip ahead. Next, it's time to carefully mask off everything and get ready to paint. Some of the places were a little difficult to tape, so for those places I brushed on some rubber cement. To fill the screw holes, I wrapped skewer sticks with a bit of tape. Had I just filled in the holes with screws, the paint could have run down and gummed up the threads. This plane will be a user plane, so I'm not going to buff everything up to a mirror finish, but black enamel paint will be a nice new set of clothes for this old guy. Okay, so it's not a fancy spray booth. Somewhere in this plane's history, someone attempted to sharpen the blade. This is a piece of history that's about to be erased, as I put a new edge on it. The blade will be hand ground and stropped to 25 degrees with a 30-degree micro bevel on the very edge. At the sharpening station, I take out my roughest stone, which I almost never use, and go to work. But I soon begin to realize that I don't really want to make a career out of this, so I went to the belt sander and carefully ground the blade down, making sure that I constantly dipped it in water so that it wouldn't overheat. That saved a lot of time, but there's still a lot of work ahead of me using the 600 grit stone. On a properly sharpened blade, I don't usually need a guide, but it's pretty much necessary when putting on a completely new edge. Almost all of the work is done on the 600 stone, and things will go a lot faster when I'm done here. Then it's on to the 1500 grit stone, which polishes up the bevel nicely. That took a little time, but then it was on to the 8000 grit stone, which I only used to put a micro bevel on the very end of the blade. A micro bevel is a thin, highly polished strip at the end of the blade, and it's only about a 32nd of an inch wide. Doing this makes for a very quick resharpening in the future. This way, I don't have to do a full sharpening for quite a while. And last of all, it was stropped on leather, covered with a Tripoli buffing compound. The next day I came back and started peeling off the tape and scraping off the rubber cement to begin reassembly. I guess my taping was okay and the edges were firmly pressed down because I didn't see any places where the paint creeped in. Assembly was pretty quick. There's not really much to these things. Adjusting the blade was quick and easy, and for this old guy's first try, I decided to go easy, and I grabbed a piece of pine from the stack. First time, and I got a nice curl, and because of the weight of this plane and a sharp edge, I never even felt the little knot halfway down. I dialed back the thickness a few times, getting thinner and thinner shavings successfully each time. I really like this plane. The weight is a definite advantage, and the sole on a jack plane is longer than any other plane that I have, which helps to keep a flat surface on the workpiece. And last of all, I've been wanting to make a board to mount my planes on the wall for a long time in order to get them out of the toolbox and keep them in a more easily accessible spot. I think now would be a pretty good time for that. Anyway, thanks for following me around the shop, and I'll see you next time. Hi, I'm Paul. This is OpenWoodShop.com, and today I'm going to show you how I restored this old jack plane